"Sit down, Emma. This table is not for people like you," she said, flicking her hand like she was brushing crumbs away. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, but the meaning cut deep. Vanessa leaned back in her chair at the brunch place, legs crossed, sunglasses pushed up, giving me that lazy smile she used when she wanted to sting. "You can sit over there." She tilted her chin toward a tiny table near the restroom. The friends she invited pretended to look at their menus, but I saw the quick glances. I knew that mix of pity and relief. They were grateful it was not their turn under her spotlight. I swallowed hard and tried to keep my breathing slow. I did not speak right away. I wanted to understand why her tone felt colder than usual. Vanessa always loved attention, but today she seemed hungry for something else. I felt it in the way she tilted her head, waiting for me to react. The restaurant noise faded a little, and my chest tightened in that familiar old way. "My name is Emma Harvey. I am 34 years old, and I work as an office administrator at a small company in Cedar Ridge. I always kept my head down. I made order out of chaos. I stayed quiet because it felt safer that way." Vanessa liked that. She liked knowing she could speak louder and shine brighter. She tapped her nails on the table and laughed a little too loudly. "Emma loves her safe little paycheck," she said. Another soft giggle rose from the group. I watched their eyes shift, unsure whether to join her or stay silent. I lowered myself into the chair at the small table, telling myself not to break open the old wounds that never fully healed. I could feel her watching me even from across the space. Her attention had a weight. It pressed on my shoulders the way it used to when we were younger. Vanessa enjoyed seeing me shrink. She enjoyed the quiet power that came from pushing me into the background. I let my fingers trace the side of the water glass, while I tried to calm the shake in my hands. I sensed movement and looked up just as she leaned forward. Her smile stretched wider, warm on the surface but sharp underneath. "You are still so easy to manage," she said, almost whispering. The words slid under my skin. I tried to steady my breath, telling myself not to let her see how much it hurt. Silence settled between us, even though we sat at separate tables. I knew her rhythm. Vanessa insulted in layers. She tested small boundaries, then pushed harder until she found the one that made me flinch. I stared at the pattern of light on the floor and reminded myself that I was not the same girl who used to leave rooms so she could laugh a little longer. I wanted to believe I had grown past that. When I looked up, she was still staring at me. Her elbow rested on the table, her chin in her hand. Her eyes narrowed like she was enjoying a private joke. I felt a cold wave run through me. Vanessa was waiting for a crack. She always did. For a moment, I wondered why she needed it so badly. That thought unsettled me in a new way. She leaned closer and lowered her voice just enough that only I could hear. "You still do not belong here, Emma." Her smile did not move, but her eyes softened in that strange way she used when she wanted to make cruelty sound like advice. I felt something shift in the center of my chest. A slow, heavy realization rose like cold smoke. I sat very still. Her words echoed inside me, hitting places I had kept quiet for too long. For the first time in years, I did not push the feeling away. I let it sit there. I let myself see her clearly. Vanessa did not slip or speak without thinking. She wanted my pain. She always had. That truth settled into me with a sharp, steady weight. I breathed in slowly and felt a strange calm move through me. I did not speak or look her way. I just sat with the truth settling deep inside. Vanessa enjoyed hurting me, and she always wanted someone to see it. Something in me shifted as I faced that. I grew up hearing one line over and over: "Vanessa just has more drive." My mother said it whenever I hesitated, whenever I asked for help, whenever I stood beside my sister and felt myself disappear in her shadow. I learned early that Vanessa was the bright one. She walked into rooms like they were waiting for her. I stayed quiet because it felt safer. My parents praised her charm, her energy, her bold choices. They called me steady, the one who tried her best, the one who made life easier by staying small. I learned to swallow the little cuts, the comments that slid in like harmless jokes, but lingered long after the laughter stopped. I felt myself folding inward so they would not have to see the parts of me that wanted more. As we got older, nothing changed. Vanessa shined a little louder every year. She told stories like she was performing. She built a life full of big promises, new paths, and sudden exits. Every time a job slipped through her fingers, she said someone sabotaged her. Every time a relationship fell apart, she said the man was threatened by her ambition. My parents nodded, comforting her, reminding her that she was meant for great things. I sat close by, listening to the same pattern repeat without a pause. They never asked what I wanted. They rarely asked how I was doing. I learned to keep my own world neat and simple. I worked in quiet spaces with steady hours. I kept my emotions tucked in places where no one had to manage them. For years, I held a job at a mid-sized company in Cedar Ridge, supporting departments, organizing schedules, keeping projects moving. People depended on me because I stayed calm. Recently, the company acquired a wellness brand that had been struggling for years. My role shifted. I was trusted with more. I made decisions behind the scenes that shaped the direction of entire teams. I never bragged about it. I never needed to. Vanessa never asked, and I never offered. She preferred to imagine my life as small. It made her feel larger. She called me the safe one, the predictable one, the sister who floated somewhere behind her without making noise. She said it like it was kindness. It never felt that way. Even now, I can hear her voice from brunch. That casual sharpness. The way she dismissed me without thinking. The sting stayed with me as I walked back to my car hours later. I held the steering wheel and let the silence settle into my chest. Something about the way she targeted me felt new. It carried weight. It carried purpose. Driving home, I tried to understand why she looked at me like she needed me to break. I went over every detail of the morning, the laughter, the glances, the way she leaned in when she wanted her words to hurt. I wondered what was happening underneath her performance. Vanessa never changed her behavior without a reason. She pushed hardest when she was hiding something. That thought stayed with me all the way down the quiet road toward my apartment. The sun had dipped low by the time I reached home. I sat in the stillness for a moment before stepping inside. I felt the ache settle deeper than usual. Brunch was cruel, but the cruelty felt pointed. It felt like she was preparing for something. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself, telling my mind not to run ahead without knowing. Still, I could feel the shift. My body recognized it even before my thoughts did. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. I expected a friend or a coworker. Instead, I saw my mother's name. Her message was short. Try to understand your sister. She's under pressure. Do not be dramatic. The words landed with a quiet heaviness. It was the same old tune, the same reflex to protect Vanessa before hearing me. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar pull to shrink, to excuse her, to pretend it did not matter. But something in me resisted. Something inside felt tired of being told to bend. I set my phone down and let the silence grow. My mother did not ask how I felt. She did not ask what happened. She only asked me to forgive Vanessa before even knowing why she needed forgiving. That realization stung more than the brunch itself. In that moment, a thought formed, slow and steady. Vanessa was not acting out of simple cruelty. She was covering something close, something that would pull me in whether I liked it or not. A quiet unease settled in my stomach. I could feel it tightening as the room dimmed around me. I knew my sister's patterns. I knew her timing. I knew the way she stirred chaos right before something slipped out of her control. The pieces were small, but they were there. As I stood in my living room, staring at the soft glow of my phone, I felt the first hint of a truth that made my breath catch. Vanessa was hiding something, and for the first time in years, I sensed it was about to reach me. I walked into the office the next morning hoping for a quiet start, but I heard two coworkers talking near the break room before I even reached my desk. One of them said, "The wellness brand sent another request. They want a new manager already." The other sighed and said, "They keep asking for restructuring. They do not even have the budget." Someone upstairs has to put a stop to this. I stood still for a moment, letting their words settle. I knew those approvals landed on my desk. I never made a scene about it. I never bragged. I handled what needed handling, because I believed fairness mattered more than noise. But hearing the timing of it made something cold move under my skin. I could not explain it yet. I just felt the shift. At my desk, I opened my laptop and tried to focus on the morning tasks. Nothing felt settled. Even the quiet hum of the office sounded sharper than usual. My thoughts kept drifting back to brunch, to Vanessa's smile, to the way she acted like she was untouchable. I pushed the memory away and reminded myself to breathe. I kept moving through emails until one new message froze me in place. It was from HR. A resume was attached. I clicked on it without thinking. When the name appeared at the top, my breath stopped in my throat. Vanessa Harvey. I read it twice, waiting for my eyes to correct themselves, waiting for the page to shift into someone else's file. It did not. My sister had applied for a management role under the brand my company now owned. A brand barely holding on. A brand seeking approval from me for every staffing decision. I felt the knot form deep in my chest, the kind that pulled memory and shock and quiet hurt into the same tight place. I sat still and let myself take in the truth. The same sister who mocked my small life wanted a job that touched the edge of my authority. She had no idea she had placed her future in a file sitting on my screen. My hands rested on the desk for a long moment. I did not feel anger. I felt something more complicated. I thought about her laughter yesterday, the easy way she dismissed me. She had no clue I held any influence. She never cared to know. I always let her believe I stayed in the shadows because it kept the peace. Now her choices had crossed into my quiet space. I closed the resume and let the screen go dim. I did not want revenge. Not then. I wanted to understand why she applied here. Vanessa never did anything without pushing it onto someone else first. If she applied for this job, she was cornered. The rest of the afternoon felt heavy. People walked past my desk, but I barely registered them. I tried to answer emails, but my mind kept drifting back to her name. I wondered what she expected. I wondered if she realized how close she was to losing control of the image she tried so hard to keep polished. I knew my sister. I knew her patterns. Desperation never arrived quietly with her. It always carried chaos behind it. After work, I drove through Cedar Ridge on instinct. The sky was soft and gray, and I needed air to settle the shaking in my chest. My car slowed near my parents' home before I realized I had turned onto their street. I did not plan to stop, but something made me pause. The front window was lit. I saw shadows moving inside. When I stepped closer, I heard a voice I knew too well. Vanessa's voice was thin, cracked, trembling in a way I had not heard since we were children. "Please, Mom, just help me one more time. Please." My mother's voice answered with a tired softness. I could not make out the words, but I felt the old, familiar rhythm. Vanessa pleading, my mother comforting, the world bending to her needs while mine were tucked aside without notice. I stood on the walkway, close enough to hear but far enough to stay unseen. Her sobs broke through the walls in uneven waves. It startled me more than I expected. I took a slow breath, letting the truth sink in. Vanessa was drowning. Something in her life had tipped too far. She was falling, and she wanted someone to carry her again. I stepped back into the dark before she could come outside or catch sight of me. The air felt colder as I moved away. My mind kept replaying the sound of her voice, sharp with fear and panic. It did not fit the woman who sat across from me at brunch with that smug smile. It did not fit the sister who told me where I belonged. It felt like two different versions of her were pulling in opposite directions. When I reached my car, I rested my hands on the roof for a moment. The quiet pressed in on me until my thoughts became clear. Vanessa was desperate, not struggling, not stressed, desperate. And people who reach that point do not think clearly. They do not act carefully. They become dangerous in ways that are hard to predict. As I stood in the soft glow of the streetlight, I felt a chill move through me. Something in her life was collapsing, and whatever it was heading straight toward me. I stayed on the walkway longer than I meant to, frozen in the quiet outside my parents' house. I told myself to leave, but my feet would not move. Vanessa's voice kept drifting through the walls, sharp at first, then breaking in the middle like something heavy finally slipping out of her control. I heard her say, "I lied at brunch. I am not doing well. I am not even close." Her breath hitched between the words. I leaned closer without meaning to. "The way you move toward a sound you have been avoiding all your life." She kept talking in short, panicked bursts. "The business failed. I owe money I cannot cover. I need this job. I need something stable. I cannot keep pretending." I closed my eyes for a moment as her confession settled through me. She had mocked me that morning, acting like she was above everything. Yet here she was begging, unraveling behind closed doors. My mother spoke in that gentle tone she saved only for Vanessa. "Everyone struggles, sweetheart. You will be fine. We will figure it out. If I need to talk to Emma, I will." The words slid under my skin like old thorns. It was always me. I was the one expected to bend, to absorb the weight, to fix what no one else wanted to touch. I stepped back into the shadows before the porch light could reveal me. My chest felt tight in that familiar place where old wounds pressed against new ones. I knew I had no business listening, but I could not pretend the sound of my mother's promise did not hurt. It was the same pattern I had lived inside for years, wrapped so tightly around our family that none of us questioned it. Vanessa would break something. My parents would cover it, and I would carry the quiet part they did not want to see. When I got home, I set my bag down and pulled out her resume again. I read it slowly this time. The exaggerations were easy to spot, titles stretched, skills inflated, roles described with words that made me pause. Even the references felt vague, like she hoped no one would check them. I let the paper rest on my lap while I breathed through the ache in my chest. I reminded myself that this was not about revenge. It was about responsibility. A management role needed someone steady, someone honest, someone who did not twist pressure into chaos. I could not deny what I knew about her. Vanessa chased approval, not accountability. The night passed slowly for me. I kept turning over the same quiet thought. If I approved this, I would be putting real people under her control. If I denied it, I would become the villain in the story she liked to tell. Either choice carried weight I never asked for. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice at my parents' house cracking under fear. It pulled something old and painful from me, something I had buried years ago. The next morning I made coffee and tried to calm my mind. I told myself I would think clearly once I settled into the routine, but before the cup even cooled, I heard a knock at my door. When I opened it, Vanessa stood there with a bright smile stretched too wide. "Hey, Em," she said, stepping inside like she owned the space. Her eyes darted around my living room, taking in details she had never cared about before. I felt her nervous energy from across the room. She sat down on the edge of my couch, smoothing her hair in quick little motions. "So, funny question," she said. "Do you have any connections at your job? Anything that could, help me get in the door?" Her voice sounded light, almost playful, but the pressure under it was sharp. Her fingers twisted the edge of her sleeve while she waited for my answer. I could see the fear hiding behind her smile. She was fishing for information, hoping she could guide the conversation without revealing how desperate she was. I kept my voice steady. "I will see what I can do." Her shoulders dropped in relief. She nodded fast, almost too fast, as if she wanted to believe everything was already fixed. "Thank you," she said. Her tone cracked just slightly at the edges before she covered it with another quick smile. She stood up after a moment and said she needed to run errands. She left with a light wave, the same kind she used when she wanted to pretend everything was under control. When the door closed behind her, the quiet settled heavy around me. She had no idea I already knew the truth. She had no clue I had heard her begging the night before. She had no understanding of the choice she had placed in my hands. As I stood in the stillness of my living room, I felt the crossroads rise in front of me. I could protect her, or I could protect the people who would be asked to trust her. The weight of that decision pressed deep into my chest, and I knew I could not avoid it much longer. I went into the office early the next morning and sat with HR under the soft fluorescent lights. I kept my voice calm as I asked neutral questions about the management role. I did not mention names. I did not hint at my connection. I just listened while the HR manager explained the responsibilities in her steady tone. She said the position would lead a small team, manage deadlines, and handle sensitive financial data from the wellness brand we had recently absorbed. I felt a slow ache form in my chest as she spoke. A role like that needed someone steady, someone who could carry pressure without shifting blame. I knew Vanessa was not built for this kind of weight. The truth settled heavy inside me, and I silently folded my hands to keep them from shaking. When I walked out of the meeting, I tried to clear my mind. I reminded myself I was only gathering information. Still, every step back to my desk felt heavier. The idea of Vanessa sitting in that role made my stomach twist. I thought about the chaos she left in every place she touched. I thought about the people who would trust her because they had no choice. I breathed through it, telling myself I needed to be fair, not emotional. But fairness had a sharp edge when it touched family history. By the time I clocked out, the day felt longer than it should have. That evening, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. It was a simple line asking me to come over for dinner. I sensed the tone behind it, the same one she used when she wanted something handled quietly. When I arrived, the lights in the house were warm and low. Vanessa was already there, dressed nicely, smiling too wide, calling me M, in that high, bright voice she used when she wanted to appear sweet. My mother fussed around the kitchen. My father sat silently at the table. Everything felt staged, like a small play they had rehearsed without inviting me to read a script. We sat down to eat. For a few minutes, the conversation stayed light, almost forced. Then my mother cleared her throat and looked at me with that practiced softness. "Emma, your sister needs help. Do not be difficult." The words slid across the table like they had been waiting for their moment. I felt the familiar tug inside me, that old pattern that tried to turn every request into an obligation. The pressure of it wrapped around my ribs in a slow, tightening hold. I chewed slowly and kept my face calm, but my heart was beating harder than I wanted to admit. Dinner ended with polite smiles. My parents said goodnight, as if everything had been settled. But as soon as I stepped outside, Vanessa followed me. Her heels clicked against the walkway. She waited until the door shut behind us before letting the sweetness fall from her face. Her voice dropped low and sharp. "You better not mess this up for me." There was no apology, no humility, just expectation. A command. The words cut deep, but I did not let my face show anything. I stood still and let the cool night air steady me. I realized in that moment that she did not see me as a sister. She saw me as a tool. Walking to my car, I felt something shift inside me, something quiet but firm. I was tired of being told to bend. I was tired of every boundary I set being erased before I even finished speaking it. I sat behind the wheel and rested my hands on the steering wheel for a long breath. I knew this was not just about a job. It was about years of conditioning, years of being shaped into someone who fixed what others broke. And now I wondered if stepping back from that role would change everything. I wondered what would happen if I finally chose my own integrity over their expectations, and if that choice would create a wound they could not ignore. When I got home, the house felt cold and still. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen filled the room as I pulled up Vanessa's resume again. I read each line slowly, letting the silence stretch between every word. The exaggeration stood out even more clearly now. The gaps looked wider. The truth sat quietly beneath the surface, waiting for me to acknowledge it fully. As I leaned back and breathed in the stillness, a question rose in me, steady and unavoidable. Why was I expected to carry everyone else's choices when they never carried mine? The weight of that question stayed with me long after the screen dimmed. I understood what I had to do. even if the path felt sharp under my feet. I had reached a point where I could no longer pretend that keeping peace was the same as doing what was right. I sat at my desk the next morning with the soft hum of the office around me, and for a long moment, I just breathed. I opened Vanessa's file one more time, letting my eyes move slowly over every line. The gaps were clear. The numbers did not match. The roles were stretched far past what she had ever held. I felt a gentle heaviness settle in my chest as I read. I kept reminding myself I was not doing this out of anger. I was protecting a team that deserved stability. When I finally clicked into the system, my hands stayed steady. I documented every inconsistency, every place where the experience did not line up, and every reason the wellness brand could not trust her with sensitive financial work. I kept my notes honest and simple. When I reached the end of the form, I signed off quietly and pushed my chair back, feeling a calm that hurt more than relief. I knew what would come next. I knew Vanessa would search for someone to blame, and I knew I would be the easiest target. But I also knew that letting her step into a position she could not handle would hurt more people than it helped. I closed my laptop and sat still for a moment, letting the quiet press against my thoughts. I had not chosen revenge. I had chosen responsibility, even if that choice carried its own kind of pain. The rejection email went out the next day. HR sent it while I was reviewing a project schedule, and the soft ping of the notification made my heart tighten. I did not open the message. I did not want to see the formal language. I already knew what it said. I tried to keep working, but part of me kept waiting for the shift, the moment when Vanessa would realize the answer had been no. I did not have to wait long. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a voice message from my mother. Her voice came through sharp with disappointment. "Emma, how could you do this? Your sister needed support and you chose cruelty. This is jealousy. It always has been. I cannot believe you would do this to her." I listened with the phone resting on my knee, feeling each word move through me like a cold wave. She never asked for my side. She never wondered why the choice was made. She only assumed I had failed Vanessa in some personal way. The ache inside me deepened in that familiar place where old wounds lived. A few minutes later, Vanessa's texts started coming. "Wow, you really showed your true colors. You must be thrilled. You always hated seeing me get ahead." Then the tone shifted, turning sharp and passive all at once. "Hope you feel good hurting me like this." You made sure I had nothing. Each message landed harder than the last. I read them in silence, letting the pain move in slow, quiet waves through my chest. I did not respond. I knew anything I said would be twisted into something I never meant. By evening, I could not sit inside anymore. I put on my shoes and walked through the neighborhood, letting the cool air settle over my thoughts. The trees were still. The sky was soft and dim. My steps felt heavy as I followed the familiar sidewalks. With each turn, I kept seeing my mother's words, hearing Vanessa's voice wrapped in blame. I had done the right thing. I knew that. But the hurt still pressed against me, reminding me how deeply I had been trained to carry their expectations. I stopped near a quiet stretch of road and leaned my hands against the railing. The truth rose in me, slow and steady. My family did not see my boundaries. They saw obligations. They saw someone who should adapt, someone who should absorb, someone who should make their problems easier. They did not see a person with a voice or a line that could not be crossed. That realization cut deeper than anything, Vanessa had said. When I got home, the lights felt too bright. I set my phone on the table and walked toward the bedroom, but it buzzed again. One more message from Vanessa. "I am not done. You think you know everything, but you do not. I know things I should not have to know." I stared at the screen, feeling a chill move down my spine. Her words carried a different edge this time, something darker, something warning me that she was shifting her anger into something else. Something pointed. I set the phone down slowly. I felt a quiet fear settle low in my stomach as I stood there in the dim room. Vanessa was hurt, cornered, and furious, and people in that state did not stay predictable for long. I could feel it in my bones. She was preparing to attack more than my decisions. She was preparing to attack my reputation, the one steady thing I had built without her knowing. The rumors reached me in pieces, carried by small pauses in conversations, and the strange way people looked at me when they thought I was not paying attention. I heard one coworker whisper, "I did not know she had that in her." Another said, "Her own sister. That is rough." I kept my eyes on my screen and pretended not to notice the shift in the air. Later that afternoon, a message popped up from an old classmate I barely spoke to anymore. "Is everything okay between you two? Vanessa said you were struggling." I stared at the words for a long moment, feeling the familiar burn settle low in my chest. I did not answer. I knew if I opened the door to defending myself, I would be dragged into another cycle of pain I was done repeating. By the end of the day, the pattern was clear. Vanessa had begun telling people I sabotaged her out of jealousy. She said I always wanted what she had. She said I held power only because I was controlling and manipulative. She painted herself as the victim, and me as the one who enjoyed hurting her. I read the messages in silence, feeling the truth of our dynamic settle deeper inside me. Peace was slipping away no matter how quiet I tried to stay. I had kept my head down for years, hoping silence would protect me. But silence was never enough with someone who needed an enemy to keep her own world from falling apart. The next morning, I arrived at the office early, hoping the quiet halls would give me a little space to breathe. I barely reached my desk when I heard my name at the front reception. The tone alone made my heart drop. I turned the corner and saw Vanessa standing at the counter in a bright dress, smiling too widely, waving as if she belonged there. "Em," she called, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I thought I'd stop by and say hi, and maybe check in about that job thing." Her voice carried a sing-song edge that made every head lift. My coworkers glanced at her, then at me, trying to stitch the pieces of the story together. She leaned closer to the receptionist and said, "My sister is very important here. You know, she makes all kinds of decisions, big ones. Some people get chances, some do not." Her words slid across the room like oil. I felt my pulse thrum in my ears, but I kept my voice steady. I walked toward her slowly, every step measured. "Vanessa, you need to leave," I said. My tone was quiet but firm. Her smile faltered for a heartbeat, then returned sharper. "Oh, come on," she said. "No need to be so dramatic. I am just visiting." Staff members nearby pretended to work, but their shoulders tensed. They heard every word. I met Vanessa's eyes and held her gaze, even though my heart trembled. "You need to leave now." Something in my calmness unsettled her. She blinked, scoffed, and turned toward the door with a loud sigh that carried enough bitterness to fill the whole lobby. "Fine," she muttered as she walked out. "Just remember who made this hard." The glass door closed behind her with a soft thud that echoed louder inside me than it did in the room. I stood there a moment longer, breathing through the tightness in my chest, letting the adrenaline settle before I returned to my desk. The rest of the day moved in slow waves. Coworkers were polite, but I saw the questions in their eyes. They did not ask, and I did not offer. My silence felt heavier than usual, but I held it close because speaking would only feed the fire Vanessa had already started. I wanted peace. I wanted distance. But wanting something and having it were two very different things with her. When I got home that evening, the house felt too quiet. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising in soft curls. My phone buzzed with a few more texts from people who claimed they were just checking in, but the subtext was clear. Vanessa had given them a story and left me to answer for it. I put the phone face down and let my shoulders fall. The weight of it all pressed through me in slow, painful waves. I knew I should not take her words personally, but the truth was that each rumor carried a small piece of the girl I used to be, the one who never felt seen or defended. Later, when I opened my laptop to finish a few tasks, a new email notification appeared from the company's legal department. The subject line made my stomach twist. "Notice of submitted concern." I clicked it open, and the words blurred for a moment before coming into focus. An anonymous complaint had been filed accusing me of misusing my authority in a hiring decision. It claimed I acted out of personal bias. It questioned my professionalism. It asked for a review. I leaned back slowly, feeling the room tilt. I did not need to guess who sent it. I felt the truth settle into my bones with a cold, steady certainty. Vanessa had shifted from rumors to something far sharper. The quiet attacks were no longer enough for her. She was reaching for my reputation now, the one part of my life she had never touched. As I sat there in the dim light of my living room, a slow realization moved through me. The real fight had begun. I met with the internal investigators early the next morning. They sat across from me in a small conference room, with soft white walls and a stack of printed documents between them. They asked me to walk them through the hiring process, step by step. I spoke slowly, keeping my voice steady, telling them exactly what happened and why I made the decision I did. I told them I reviewed the resume, saw inconsistencies, and followed policy the same way I always had. I did not defend myself with emotion or mention my family. I only told the truth. When I finished, I folded my hands on the table and waited. One of them glanced at the file and said, almost gently, "There is nothing here that shows wrongdoing." The other nodded. "This complaint does not hold." The words eased something tight inside me, but the relief felt thin. I thanked them and stepped out of the room. The hallway felt quieter than usual. Even though I had been cleared, a soft shake ran through me. Vanessa had crossed into something deeper than anger. She wanted to hurt me, not just win. And admitting that to myself made the air feel heavier. I went back to my apartment that afternoon, moving on autopilot. I put my bag down, turned on a lamp, and stood there in the soft yellow light. The silence pressed against me. I tried to breathe through it, but something inside me gave way. Tears came slowly. Not loud or wild, just soft and steady, the way water moves when it finally finds a crack. I leaned against the counter and let the years unwind inside me. Not just the complaint, not just the rumors, all of it. Every time I swallowed hurt to keep the peace. Every moment I let myself shrink so she could shine. Every time I told myself it was easier not to ask for more. I cried in a way that felt unfamiliar, like my body had waited decades for one quiet moment to release everything it held. I kept thinking about the girl I used to be, the one who tried so hard to stay small enough not to cause trouble. I felt exhausted down to my bones. I whispered into the empty room, "I cannot keep doing this." Saying it out loud made the truth feel solid. When the tears slowed, I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out an old family album. I sat on the floor and flipped through the pages, letting the images settle one by one. There was Vanessa in every center frame, smiling brightly, pulling attention toward herself like it was her right. And there I was, off to the seed, hands folded, quiet, steady, always watching. I turned the pages and saw the pattern appear again and again. Vanessa taking the space, my parents cheering her on, me filling in the background so she could look bigger. I found old text threads on my phone next. I scrolled through them slowly, seeing memories I had forgotten. Vanessa asking for rides, Vanessa asking for money, Vanessa asking me to fix things she broke, my mother urging me to be patient and understand her. Never once did they ask if I was tired. Never once did they ask if I was hurting. The weight of it hit me with a force I had never let myself feel before. All these years I thought staying quiet meant being kind, but now I wondered if it only meant abandoning myself. A small flame of anger rose inside me then, slow but steady. It did not feel wild or out of control. It felt clear, clean, honest. I had spent my whole life turning anger inward, folding it until it looked like guilt. But now I let myself feel it without apology. Vanessa had not just crossed a line. She had stepped straight into my life and tried to pull it apart to protect her own image. And my family, The people who should have cared had handed her the tools. I sat with that truth for a long moment, letting it settle in my chest. It did not bring rage. It brought clarity, a quiet understanding that hurt more than it burned. I finally said softly, "I deserve better than this." And for the first time in my life, the words felt real. As the room grew darker, I set the album aside and wiped my eyes. The exhaustion was still there, but something else had risen beneath it, a steady resolve. I had spent years absorbing damage that was never mine to hold. I had bent until parts of me no longer remembered how to stand on their own. But that night, in the small stillness of my living room, I felt myself straighten in ways no one could see. I understood then that I could not go back to who I had been. The breaking point had come and passed, leaving clarity in its wake. I was done being the quiet place where everyone else dropped their pain. I was done carrying what did not belong to me. And as that truth settled fully inside me, I felt a shift that was small but powerful. I had decided to stop absorbing the damage and start protecting myself. I spent the next morning moving through my day with a quiet steadiness I had not felt in years. My phone buzzed several times, my mother asking if I planned to fix things, my father adding a short, "Call your sister." I answered each message politely, nothing more. I kept my replies short and clear, because I finally understood that engaging emotionally only pulled me back into the old trap. I did not argue, defend, or explain. I simply said I was busy and hoped they were well. The silence that followed told me they did not know how to respond when I did not fold. When another string of texts came from Vanessa, sharp and frantic, I read each one with a slow breath. I felt the familiar sting, but I refused to give her access to that part of me anymore. I blocked her for the first time in my life. The moment I pressed the button, a strange lightness spread through me. It felt small but real, like closing a window during a storm. I told myself quietly that I had the right to protect my own peace. I said it again in my head until it felt true. At work, something shifted in me without me planning it. I stepped into meetings with more clarity than I expected. I asked direct questions. I offered solutions without second-guessing myself. When my supervisor stopped me in the hallway and said, "You handled that update beautifully," I heard the sincerity in his voice. Instead of shrinking the way I usually did, I let myself accept the compliment. The ground under my feet felt steadier, like I was finally standing in my own life instead of surviving inside someone else's story. Later that afternoon, I received an internal request to review upcoming communication materials for the wellness brand we recently restructured. It was routine work, nothing unusual. I opened the draft of the newsletter and skimmed the headings. New leadership, updated program goals, contractor spotlight. I moved down the page with the calm rhythm of someone settling into their role. Then I reached the name under the contractor section, and my breath caught in my throat. It said, Vanessa Harvey, project contributor. My hand stilled on the keyboard as I reread it twice, feeling a slow pull in my chest. A minute later, an email popped up from HR. They apologized, explaining they did not know she was my sister. She had been hired for a small short-term project before the restructuring. They wanted my input before confirming the final approval, because the work now fell under my department's oversight. I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of that sink in. I told myself to breathe. I reminded myself this was not about revenge. It was about responsibility. The same responsibility I carried toward every team member affected by my decisions. But seeing her name there, after everything she had done, brought a quiet ache I did not expect. I wondered how she found her way back into this company so quickly. I wondered if she told anyone the truth. I wondered if she felt even a moment of regret. Then I stopped myself, because I knew wondering only opened the door to the same old pain. What mattered now was whether she was stable, honest, or reliable enough to touch the project. And the truth was that she was not. She had not been for years, yet part of me hesitated. not out of guilt, but out of the old habit of carrying her needs over my own. I felt the pull of that familiar pattern and recognized it for what it was. I read through her assignment carefully, studying the responsibilities. It required coordination, communication, and confidentiality. It required someone who did not use personal relationships as weapons. I traced each requirement with my eyes and thought about the way she had tried to wound me, not just as a sister, but as a person who earned her place in her job. That thought settled deep. It made me ask myself the question I had avoided for so long. How many times had I protected her at my own expense? And how many times did I mistake silence for kindness when it was really fear? I leaned back and looked at the ceiling, feeling the new steadiness in my body. I had control in this moment, not power over her, but power over myself. Power to act with integrity instead of emotion. Power to make a decision based on truth instead of family pressure. I felt the quiet weight of it, and then the strange calm that followed. I knew the choice I made here would echo. I also knew it would define the kind of person I wanted to be. As I stared at her name one more time, a single thought rose inside me, slow and honest. What does doing the right thing really mean when it finally matters? And in that moment, I realized I held the final say over Vanessa's last remaining opportunity. I sat at my desk the next morning with the contractor proposal open in front of me. I had read hundreds of these before, but this one made my stomach tighten. The numbers didn't line up. The projected hours were inflated. The cost breakdown repeated the same categories twice. And the sample she attached looked strangely polished in a way that didn't match her usual work. I copied one sentence into a search bar and felt my breath slide out when the exact phrasing appeared from a public template site. I leaned back slowly, letting the truth settle in a place I had tried to ignore. Vanessa wasn't just unstable. She was willing to manipulate anything she needed to survive. I moved through each page with a quiet focus, checking the language, the metrics, the mock-ups. The more I looked, the more I saw the same pattern I'd seen my whole life. Overstated strengths, missing details, promises that didn't match reality. My chest felt tight, not out of anger, but out of a kind of tired recognition. It was the same story she had lived for years, now wrapped in business language instead of family excuses. I let myself sit with that feeling because avoiding it never protected me before. After gathering my notes, I reached out to the brand's director. He responded quickly and asked to speak privately. When we sat down, he hesitated before saying, "I'll be honest, Emma. Something felt off." She pushed hard for the contract and reacted poorly when we asked basic questions. I nodded, letting him speak without revealing anything personal. He didn't need to know the history. He only needed to understand the facts in front of him. I explained the inconsistencies in the proposal, the copied materials, and the unstable approach to the project timeline. I kept my tone even, professional, steady. I made sure every concern was rooted in evidence, not emotion. When I finished, he exhaled and thanked me. He said they would be rejecting the contract quietly. I told him that was his decision to make and left it at that. When I returned to my office, I waited for some surge of victory or justice. None came. Instead, I felt a soft sense of relief, the kind that comes when the truth finally shows itself in plain sight. There was no satisfaction in watching her fall. There was only the weight of a long pattern finally becoming undeniable. That evening, as I locked my door, I saw a shadow outside the frosted glass near the hallway. I didn't think much of it until I heard a sharp knock, followed by my name in a shaking voice. "Emma, open the door. I know you're in there." My heart thudded once, slow and heavy. I stayed still, listening. When I didn't answer, she hit the door again, harder this time. "I said open the door." Her voice swung between anger and panic, and I could hear the tremble under both. I stepped back into the living room and kept the lights low. She didn't need more fuel. I heard her crying, then gasping, then trying to steady herself. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" she said, her words sharp and breathless. "You think you can just sit there and pretend you're the adult in the room?" I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling that old sting rise in my chest. Her voice had the same tone she used when we were kids, the same tone that always made me fold. But I kept my hands at my sides, still and quiet. Her crying shifted again, softer this time. I'm drowning, Emma. I'm trying. For a moment, I nearly stepped forward. Then she snapped. But you don't care. You never cared. You owe me. After everything, you owe me. The words hit me like cold air. Owe her. After years of sacrifice, silence, and shrinking so she could take up more space. Owe her. I let the truth fill me. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding control. I didn't unlock the door. I didn't speak. I let her words echo and fade on their own. Eventually, her begging turned into strained breathing, then anger, then quiet. I heard her pacing, muttering, pacing again. She tried one last attempt, her voice tight and furious. I know what you do at that company. I know your role. You think I don't? You think you can hide behind your little title? She stepped closer to the door. You owe me for everything, Emma. Everything. I felt something shift inside me. Small, but powerful. Not anger, not fear. A quiet truth rising to the surface after years of being pushed down. I finally understood that the person on the other side of the door wasn't just my sister. She was the storm I had been bracing against my whole life. And standing in my own homorit with the door locked between us, I felt ready to speak my truth at last. I agreed to meet Vanessa at a small cafe halfway between our places. I chose a corner table where the light was soft and the noise was low enough for honesty. When she walked in, she spotted me right away. She didn't smile. She just moved quickly toward the chair across from mine and sat down like she was claiming the space instead of joining me in it. Before I could speak, she leaned forward and said, "You really destroyed everything for me. You know that?" Her voice was steady, but I could hear the thin crack under it. I took a slow breath and let the silence sit between us. I needed that moment to keep myself grounded. She tapped her fingers on the table and said, I don't understand how you could be so selfish, so jealous. I thought you were better than that. I listened to her words fall one by one, each shaped to sting. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I only watched her face and felt the familiar ache behind my ribs, the one that had followed me since childhood. When she finally stopped, I nodded once, more to myself than to her. Vanessa, I said quietly, you made choices I couldn't fix. She blinked as if I had spoken in a language she didn't recognize. I felt my heartbeat slow, not from fear, but from clarity. I had never spoken to her from a place like this before. She lifted her chin and said, You always do this. You pretend you're calm, but you're always judging me. You think you're above me just because you got lucky with work. I let her talk. I let every word land. I didn't need to push back because the truth was already sitting in the space between us. When she paused again, waiting for me to react, I said, I denied the contracts because they weren't honest, not because of you. Her eyebrows pulled together fast. She whispered, Dishonest? As if the word had scratched her. I nodded. The numbers didn't add up. The samples weren't yours. The claims weren't backed up. I would have denied anyone who turned that in. It wasn't personal. I kept my tone level. No blame, no heat. Just the truth laid out cleanly between us. She leaned back slowly, crossing her arms. You're lying, she said. Her voice was softer now, almost uncertain. I held her gaze. I'm not lying, I said. I'm not attacking you. I'm just telling you what I couldn't say before. I felt that familiar heaviness rise again, but this time it didn't pull me inward. It steadied me. I added, I won't carry your choices anymore. Her eyes widened a little, as if I had touched a bruise she didn't know she had. You owe me, she said faintly. Hearing her say it face to face made something inside me shift for good. I shook my head. I don't owe you my silence. I don't owe you my peace. And I don't owe you my reputation. She stared at me like the room had tilted without warning. For a moment, neither of us moved. She opened her mouth but closed it again, searching for a place to land her next accusation. None came. Her shoulders dropped a little, the first crack in the posture she always tried to hold. I continued gently. I'm not responsible for your life. I'm not responsible for fixing things when you break them, and I won't lie for you. Not at work and not in this family. Saying the words out loud made my breath feel fuller, like I had finally stepped into a space that had been waiting for me. Vanessa stared at the table, her jaw tight. Then she looked back up at me with something like disbelief. "You think you're stronger than me now?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but the edge was still there. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I think I'm finally being honest. That's all." She didn't respond. I saw something shift behind her eyes. Not acceptance, not understanding. Just a sudden awareness that the old version of me wasn't sitting across from her anymore. The silence that followed felt different from all the silences we'd had before. This one held both of us still. She pushed her chair back abruptly and stood up. "You'll regret this," she said. The words were soft, almost breathless, like she wasn't sure if she meant them. I didn't rise. I didn't flinch. I simply said, "I hope someday you find a better way to live." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't pity. It was the truth I had carried for years, but never spoken. She stared at me one last time, stunned in a way I had never seen. Then she turned and walked out of the cafe without looking back. I watched her go, feeling a strange stillness settle in my chest. Her anger didn't scare me. Her threat didn't shake me. It was the silence after she left that felt heavier than anything she had said. And sitting alone at that small table, I realized the real shift had already happened. The days that followed were strangely quiet. Vanessa didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up anywhere. At first, I thought the silence might bring me peace, but instead, it felt like a space waiting to be filled with something I couldn't name. My phone buzzed constantly, though. It was my mother every few hours, leaving long messages that always circled back to the same line. "Please just apologize to keep the family together." The way she said it made it sound simple, like I had pushed a vase off a table and should just pick it up. I listened to each message with the same steady breath. Then I deleted them. I didn't respond. I finally understood that my mother didn't want truth. She wanted quiet. She wanted things to look smooth from the outside so she wouldn't have to examine the cracks inside. I wasn't angry. I was just done carrying the weight she had handed me since childhood. A part of me wondered how many times I'd apologized for things that weren't mine, just to keep the peace, and how much of myself I had lost in the process without even noticing. At work, the contrast felt almost unreal. My inbox filled with messages from different team members. Some were short, like "thanks for handling that so fairly." Others were more personal, telling me they appreciated the way I held everyone to the same standard. I read each one slowly. I hadn't expected gratitude. I had only done my job. But knowing that people saw the integrity behind it steadied me in a way I didn't know I needed. It felt like the ground under my feet finally decided to stay still. One afternoon, while I was reviewing a simple timeline request, I overheard two coworkers talking in the hallway. I wasn't trying to listen, but I recognized Vanessa's name immediately. One said, "Didn't she apply here too?" The other replied, "Yeah, but they said the samples didn't match the portfolio. Whole thing fell apart." I sat still for a moment, letting the words settle around me. I hadn't been involved. I hadn't said a single thing to anyone outside my own team. Whatever happened to her happened because of her choices, not mine. The realization came with a calm I didn't expect. I didn't feel victory, just clarity. Later that evening, my mother called again. This time I picked up, mostly because I wanted to hear her tone rather than imagine it. She rushed into her words as soon as she heard my voice. "Emma, this is getting out of hand. She won't talk to any of us. You're her sister. Fix this before it gets worse." Her voice trembled with frustration, not fear. I let her finish. Then I said, "Mom, I'm not fixing this. I didn't break anything." The silence that followed was long and uneven. When she finally spoke, she whispered, "You've never talked to me like that." I closed my eyes. "I know," I said. "That was the problem." We ended the call quietly. I set my phone down and sat with the feeling that spread through my chest. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't anger. It was something like standing up straight after years of bending without noticing how much it hurt. The next morning, my aunt texted me, "Your mom is upset. Vanessa hasn't replied to anyone. Just be patient." I typed back, "I am patient. I'm just not responsible." She didn't respond. I wasn't surprised. My family had built its whole rhythm around pretending Vanessa's storms were normal weather, and my job was to hold the umbrella. They didn't know what to do when I put it down. As the week stretched on, little pieces of information reached me through different channels. My cousin mentioned that Vanessa had tried pitching another company with the same proposal, and when they questioned her numbers, she had walked out furious. My uncle said she had been posting vague messages online about being betrayed by people who should have loved her. No one believed her. Not anymore. It was strange to watch the dynamic shift so suddenly. The family that had bent itself around her moods for years was finally meeting the natural consequences of her actions. I didn't celebrate. I just observed. I spent evenings in my apartment sitting near the window with a cup of tea, letting the quiet fill the space where guilt used to live. I realized how conditioned I had been to jump at every crisis she created. The stillness felt unfamiliar, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I was learning how to breathe differently. Late one night, my phone lit up again. It was my mother. I debated letting it ring, but something in me chose to answer. She didn't sound angry this time, just tired. "Emma," she said, "I think you should know. Vanessa mentioned she might show up at your company's event next week." I felt my breath pause for one careful second. Then I nodded to myself. Of course she would. Of course she would choose the one place in my life I had built without her shadow. My mother waited for my reaction. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm enough to surprise even me. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "I'll be ready." I heard her before I even saw her. "Emma, are you seriously pretending you don't see me?" Her voice cut through the warm hum of the event, sharp enough that a few people turned their heads. I felt my chest tighten for a second, the old reflex, but I kept my hands steady at my sides. I wasn't going to fold tonight. I turned toward her slowly. Vanessa stood at the entrance like she was walking a runway, wrapped in a glitter dress that sparkled too loudly under the lights. Her smile stretched thin, almost trembling. I could see the panic hiding behind her eyes even from across the room. I whispered, "You made it," because I didn't know what else to offer. I was tired of performing gentleness she hadn't earned, yet the habit came back without warning. She stepped closer fast, trying to keep her voice low but not trying very hard. "I should be up there with the team. You know that. You know this should have been mine." I felt other eyes drifting toward us, small glances, tiny pauses. My breath steadied anyway. I wasn't guilty. I wasn't hiding anything. I said, "Let's talk after the program, not here." She scoffed, loud enough for the whole table near us to hear. "Of course you don't want to talk here. You never tell the truth in public." Her words stung, not because they were true, but because they were the last trick she had left. Twist the story before someone else can. I took one step back, giving both of us space. I could feel the weight of movement in the room. People were trying to pretend they weren't listening. My supervisor gave me a small look across the floor, a quiet check-in. I lifted my hand a little to tell him I was fine. The director came over a moment later, holding a tablet with the event schedule. He didn't even look at Vanessa at first. "Emma, we're about to introduce the contractor team section. Could you confirm the order?" I nodded and gave a quick scan. That was when Vanessa inserted herself between us with a smile so forced it looked painful. "Perfect timing," she said. "You can just tell him I'm supposed to be in that announcement. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." She glanced back at me, expecting me to fix it like always. The director paused, confused. "I'm sorry. I don't think we've met, and I'm not aware of any pending contractor files with your name." She straightened, shoulders rising. Well, Emma knows. She signed off on it. I felt the room tilt slightly, not in fear, but in disbelief that she was still trying to spin this. I kept my voice steady. I didn't sign anything, Vanessa, or lips pressed together, shaking. You told me you'd help me. You told me you'd make sure I got a chance. I let myself breathe. Her version of help had always meant carrying her weight, lying for her, covering for her. Not anymore. The director looked between us, still polite but firmer now. Ma'am, your proposal was denied because of major inaccuracies. It wasn't a close call. It simply didn't meet our standards. His tone was calm, straight, almost gentle. He didn't know the history. He didn't know he had just lifted a stone that hid years of rot. Vanessa froze. It was like her face cracked for a moment. Her mouth opened, then closed again. A few people at the sign-in table looked away quickly, pretending not to see. She whispered, "What inaccuracies?" Almost too quiet for him to hear. He answered the way any director would. The numbers didn't match your supporting documents, and the work samples weren't original. We couldn't move forward. There was no judgment in his voice, just facts. Clean, simple facts, the kind she always avoided because they didn't bend to her stories. She turned to me like she needed me to deny it, as if I would jump in the way I used to. But I didn't move. I felt calm, solid. My heart didn't race, my voice didn't shake. I just stood there, letting the truth settle in the space between us. I didn't say anything about your proposal, I told her softly. I didn't influence anything. That was the truth, and we both knew it. She stared at me with wide eyes, confused by the absence of guilt she expected to find. She whispered, "You could have fixed it." I shook my head. It wasn't mine to fix. Her breath hitched. The director excused himself politely, unaware he had just dismantled a script she had spent months performing. When he walked away, she looked around the room, searching for someone to catch her fall. No one did. She stepped back, touching the edge of the table like she needed to hold on to something. Then she turned around and walked out fast, her heels clicking unevenly on the floor. Not dramatic, not explosive, just gone. I watched the door swing closed behind her and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Quiet, not relief, not victory, just quiet. And that quiet told me the breaking point had arrived for both of us. I walked out of the event hall slowly, letting the cool night air settle against my skin. My heart felt strangely steady, as if the noise inside me had finally lowered to something I could stand. I didn't rush. I didn't try to explain anything to anyone. I just needed space to feel what had shifted inside me without being pulled back into the old patterns. I stepped onto the sidewalk and breathed in. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying someone else's choices on my shoulders. I kept replaying the moment Vanessa walked out, her heels clicking fast, her face set in that mix of anger and disbelief. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel responsible. I just felt done. As I walked, I thought about how many years I had spent shrinking myself so she could feel larger. I remembered every time I gave up an opportunity because she needed one. Every time I silenced my own discomfort just to keep the peace. Every time I apologized first, even when she broke something I valued. The pattern was so deep that I didn't even see it until I stepped outside of it. I whispered to myself, "I'm not doing that anymore." And hearing my own voice say it out loud settled something in me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't dramatic. It was just true. When I got home, my phone lit up with messages from my parents. My mother wrote, "Please fix this. I can't stand the tension. Just make it right with her." My father followed with, "You know she doesn't handle things well. Help her through this." The old script, the old expectation. I stared at their words and waited for the usual guilt to rise, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a soft sadness for the girl I used to be. She would have rushed to comfort them, to soothe them, to take on a burden that was never hers. I typed back, "I love you both, but I'm not stepping in. This is between her and her choices. It was the first time I had ever drawn a line with them without apologizing. I hit send before fear could pull me back. The silence that followed felt like proof of how deeply they'd come to depend on me fixing things. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tense. I just felt clear. Over the next few days, I let myself stay quiet. I answered their messages politely, but I didn't feed into the guilt. I didn't fall into their emotional loops. I let space exist, even when it felt unfamiliar. And each time I held that boundary, I felt a little lighter, like I was finally stepping into a life that belonged to me. Rumors reached me from the edges of the family. Small comments passed through cousins and aunts. Vanessa had tried applying for another contractor position somewhere else. They rejected her for the same inconsistencies. I hadn't said a word to anyone. I hadn't interfered. Her choices were catching up, all on their own, and the family was starting to see it. My mother sent me a message that said, "I don't know what's happening to her. She won't talk to us." I read it twice. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't step forward. I just replied, "I hope she finds her way," because I meant it. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace, and this was the first time I felt close to it. Later that evening, as I sat on my couch with the soft lamplight warming the room, my phone buzzed again. Vanessa's name filled the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, bracing for anger, for blame, for the storm I'd come to expect from her. But her message was only 6 words. "I don't know who you are anymore." I read it once, then again. The exhaustion behind her words was louder than any scream she'd ever thrown at me. For a moment, I felt the old instinct rise, the one that wanted to comfort her, explain myself, reassure her that I was still her safety net. But I stopped. I breathed. And I let the truth inside me settle into place. I typed back, "I'm finally myself." My hands didn't shake when I sent it. I leaned back, letting the quiet wrap around me. It wasn't the triumphant ending I used to imagine. It was softer, smaller, and somehow stronger. I felt a shift inside me, not like a door slamming shut, but like a window opening to something I'd never allowed myself to feel. As I sat there, listening to the stillness of my apartment, I realized that something new was beginning. I couldn't name it yet. I couldn't see where it would lead, but I could feel it, rising slowly, gently, like the first breath after years of holding everything in. And for once, I didn't feel afraid of what came next. The quiet settled into my home so slowly that I didn't notice it at first. One morning, I woke up and realized I had slept through the night without bracing for a message, without waiting for the sound of my phone, without feeling that small knot of dread sitting under my ribs. I lay there for a moment, staring at the soft light on my ceiling, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: ease. I got ready for work without rushing. I made my coffee without glancing at my phone. I walked out the door without checking over my shoulder. It felt strange at first, almost unfamiliar, like wearing a new coat that still needed to warm to my shape. But as I drove, I felt my shoulders drop little by little, as if my body was finally realizing it didn't have to defend itself anymore. At work, things felt different too. People smiled at me when I walked in. Not the forced, careful smiles they gave when Vanessa's rumors were spreading, but warm ones that carried respect. A coworker stopped me near the break room and said, "I'm glad you handled things the way you did. It mattered." I thanked her quietly, but inside, I felt something settle deeper. Maybe integrity really does echo farther than fear. My days grew fuller in a way that didn't drain me. I took on new projects. I spoke up more in meetings. I didn't shrink myself or wait for someone else's reaction before choosing my words. And each time I practiced that small act of confidence, it became easier to breathe. Friendships deepened too. A colleague invited me for lunch and told me she had seen how much pressure I'd been under. Another asked how I was adjusting, not to pry, but to check on me. Little moments like that reminded me that kindness was still possible. I had just been too tangled in someone else's chaos to see it clearly. Days passed, and Vanessa stayed silent. No messages, No surprise visits. No guilt traps. It was like her storm had finally blown past me, leaving a landscape I barely recognized. I kept expecting the crash of lightning, the sudden shift back to old patterns. But nothing came, just calm. I walked through my home one evening after work, noticing how the air felt lighter. I sat on my couch and listened to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of someone walking their dog outside, the gentle quiet that didn't feel empty. It felt like a clean slate. I whispered to myself, peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of manipulation. And that truth hit me harder than anything Vanessa ever said to me. I had mistaken survival for love for far too long. Now I was learning what love actually felt like when it wasn't tied to fear or responsibility. I didn't hate her. I didn't want her punished. I just wanted to stop bleeding for someone who never tried to stop the cut. And in this new silence, I could finally feel the edges of my own life again. My choices, my steps, my hopes. I started journaling at night, not to analyze myself, but just to see my own thoughts without someone else's shadow over them. I wrote about simple things, my morning walks, the taste of the soup I made, a laugh I shared with a coworker, moments that felt ordinary to anyone else but felt like tiny victories to me. The strange thing was, the more I focused on my own life, the less space there was for fear. My breathing softened. My steps felt grounded. Even the way I looked in the mirror changed. I didn't search my reflection for signs of exhaustion or warning. I just saw myself, steady and present. One evening, as I stood by my window watching the sky fade into a deep blue, I felt a pull inside me. A small, quiet gratitude for the people listening to my story, for the shared moments of recognition, for the kindness that had carried me through more than I realized. I found myself thinking, almost whispering, that if my voice reached anyone who had ever felt this way, I hope my journey gave them strength. And if they wanted to walk with me through more stories, more truths, I would be grateful for their presence, their support, their willingness to stay connected as I kept moving forward. I realized how much it meant to be seen, and if they chose to stay, listen, or join me again, it would mean more than they knew. As the sky darkened, I felt something shift gently. Not an ending, not a victory, a beginning, quiet, steady, trustworthy. For the first time in my life, my future didn't feel like a place I had to fear or negotiate. It felt like a place I could finally enter without shrinking. And as I closed my eyes, I knew I was getting ready to speak the truth I had never dared to say before. I woke up on the first morning after everything settled and felt a kind of stillness I didn't recognize at first. For so long, my mind woke up before my body did, already bracing, already scanning for the next fire I'd have to put out. But that morning, I lay there in the quiet and realized I didn't owe my first breath to anyone's crisis anymore. Didn't have to check my phone. I didn't have to rehearse what I might apologize for. I didn't have to shrink. I sat up slowly, letting the quiet move through me. It felt almost fragile, like something I might break if I wasn't careful. But the longer I stayed in it, the more I realized it wasn't fragile at all. It was mine, and it was earned. I made my coffee the way I like it, not the rushed version I used to sip on my way to someone else's problem. I stood by the window and watched the light spread across my living room. I noticed how different the air felt, how much space there suddenly was without guilt pressing in from all sides. It wasn't joy exactly. It was something quieter, deeper, relief with a steady heartbeat. As I moved through my day, I kept catching myself in small moments that felt new. I answered emails with confidence instead of hesitation. I walked into meetings without shrinking into the corners. I let people see me, not the edited, smaller version I used to present, but the real me, the one who had survived more than most people guessed. For years, I thought betrayal only destroyed. I thought pain only hollowed people out. But when I looked back over everything, I could see a different truth forming. Betrayal stripped away the noise. It forced me to face myself. It showed me what I could no longer carry. and what I deserved to hold on to. I thought about Vanessa more than I expected to, not with anger, not even disappointment, just with a soft clarity I'd never given myself space to feel. She had taken from me because I let her, not out of cruelty on my part, but out of habit. I had been trained to fill her empty spaces with my own pieces. I thought that was loyalty. I thought that was love. But love isn't sacrifice without boundaries, and loyalty isn't losing yourself to keep someone else comfortable. I walked slowly around my apartment, touching the back of my couch, the edge of my table, the frame of a quiet photo. I realized how much of my life had been lived in emotional shadows. I stayed quiet to avoid conflict. I stepped aside to make room for others. I swallowed hurt because I believed silence kept families together. And every time I did that, I became a little smaller. I didn't want to be small anymore. I didn't wish Vanessa harm. I didn't hope she failed. I hoped she healed. But I finally understood that healing her was not my job. I could hold compassion from a distance. I could wish her clarity without losing mine. I could let go without guilt tugging at my sleeves. My mother called me that evening, asking how I was holding up. I could hear the worry in her voice. I could hear the old pattern trying to pull me back into its rhythm. But I answered with a steady calm. "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it. For the first time, I truly meant it. After we hung up, I sat on my couch and let the weight of that truth settle. I was fine, not pretending, not surviving, living, breathing, choosing myself without apology. I thought about all the people who had listened to my story, who stayed with me through the ugliest moments, who understood what it meant to lose yourself inside a family that never saw your fullness. I felt a quiet gratitude rise in me, as natural as breathing. If my voice had found them, if my journey had reached someone else standing where I once stood, I hoped it gave them strength. And if they chose to stay connected, to walk with me into whatever stories come next, their presence would mean more than they realized. I felt grateful for every listener, every heart that held space beside mine. I walked to my window again and watched the sky fade from gold into soft blue. It felt like watching a new chapter open on its own. No drama, no noise, just a slow widening of the horizon, inviting me forward. All my life, I chased approval like it was the price of belonging. I bent myself into shapes that made other people comfortable. I stayed silent to keep the peace. I walked on eggshells to keep someone else from breaking. But somewhere in all that breaking, I found something solid inside myself. Integrity over approval, peace over patterns, self-respect over silence. I whispered it to myself, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. I finally chose myself. And as the last light slipped across my floor, I understood that this wasn't an ending at all. It was freedom.